have proposed to broaden the current standard concept of animism as defined by Professor Philippe Descola. They pointed out two main characteristics of Southeast Asian animism that contrast with the Amazonian context. First, animism in Southeast Asia is not purely egalitarian. It features a proliferation of spirits, souls, and sometimes deities, with hierarchy between them. The sacrifice is a central religious act as it expresses hierarchies inside the non-human world as well as the human dependence on and submission to the spirits. Second, Southeast Asian animism is not purely local. Noting that sacrificial rituals often assume the form of more or less asymmetrical exchange, Eurem and Sprenger argue that relations to spirit also frame relations to neighbor, strangers, state, or market. So this is the second dimension of Southeast Asian animism. I would say a kind of horizontal dimension, contrasting with the vertical hierarchical dimension. This is the second dimension of Southeast Asian animism, has been often neglected in the anthropological literature. Many authors have insisted upon the idea that animist societies, which they equate with upland population, had small or fragmented social spaces. By contrast with the lowland and mostly Buddhist populations who had developed long-distance connections through trade and religious networks. However, my fieldwork among an upland Mon Khmer-speaking population of northern Laos, the Khmu, provided me with a different perspective. Among the Khmu, but this is true also for many other upland groups, the ritual economy focuses traditionally on the acquisition and the exchange of specific plants like rice, animals like buffaloes, and goods like bronze drums that are given high value because they possess a soul, a potency, an ability to grow and to make grow, as well as to please the spirits. They are used in major rituals like wedding, building of a new house, funerals, and interestingly, they are all connected to the outside world. Rice is cultivated in the fields and kept in the Sweden huts, and then in the barns built in the outskirts of the settlements. Buffaloes roam freely in the forest part of the year and are often bought in lowland villages or cities. Bronze drums are also obtained through labor or trade and buried in the old forest that surrounds the villages near the graveyard. In sum, goods crucial to the ritual reproduction of society and to the preservation of the relations between the living and the ancestors on the one side, and the wife-givers and the wife-takers on the other side, also imply relations with the outside, and for some of them, such as the bronze drum, with relatively distant places and peoples. So my presentation will insist on this translocal aspect of Southeast Asian animism. I will show that it builds upon what I call inclusive religious categories common to different ethnic groups, and that under specific historical conditions, it sustains the creation and the reproduction of multi-ethnic territorial systems or collectives in the sense Philippe Descola gives to this term. So I draw upon an example, a case study in Vieng Phukha, which is a small city and small center of a district in northwest Laos, located on a small altitude plateau halfway between the Chinese and the Thai border. Vieng Phukha is surrounded by ruins of stupa, temples, and old fortifications, which origins are still unknown. It doesn't work. Why? Yeah. That's the core place, and that's it, yes. The main complex of ruins lies on and around a small hill located at the southwestern end of a plain where the city is now settled. The oral traditions say it used to be the center of a fortified city, or Vieng, organized in 3 concentric circles, the inner circle for the monks, the middle one for the soldiers, and the outer circle for the craft workers. From the top of the hill, one can observe a series of ditches as well as the vestige of religious buildings built in bricks, surrounded by ramparts covering a total surface of roughly 2,500 square meters. This site is said to host powerful spirits, and no archaeological excavation or tourism development has been undertaken there. Very little is known about the origin of that city, whose construction is attributed to invaders coming either from contemporary Chinese, Northern Thai, or Burmese territories. These uncertainties likely reflect the constant political instability in this area during the last centuries and the countless invasions and displacements of population that affected it. Indeed, Vieng Phukra was always at the periphery of several polities under Burmese and Siamese rule, and its populations have been captured and displaced many times. Today, the historical core of Vieng Phukra coincides with mostly Kumu, Samtao, and Le villages. Kumu are Mon Khmer speakers considered as the first inhabitants of the area, and they are mainly animist. Samtao are also a Mon Khmer speaking population believed to come from the Burmese regions west of the Mekong and to have settled here sometimes in the course of the 18th or maybe 17th century. Few of these Samtao villagers still speak their own language, and they claim a Buddhist identity. Finally, the Tai Le are Thai speakers who say they came from southern Yunnan, but their ancestors have been resettled many times, and those living in Vieng Phukra today are settled in this region since only 1 century. So, surprisingly, in this context, all these villages share a common myth of origin, though with substantial variations, and until the early 1970s, they also used to collaborate for a major ritual organized each year for the spirits of the locality. So I will first explain this common myth of origin. Kumu and Thai population of this area considered that they are all related to the founder of the Vieng. But this exact nature of this relation can vary in their oral literature, from patronage to direct biological link. So to put things simply, given the little time I have here, there are 2 main versions that allow 2 interpretations and transcriptions of the name Vieng Phukra, and both of them differ actually from the official transcriptions that you have at the top here. So the first version tells the story of a procession of soldiers and craftsmen led by a man called Cham. Before they could create the city of Vieng Phukra, they had to fight 3 wild animals, 3 beasts, that were the guardians of the place: a giant snake, a giant tiger, and a giant elephant. 2 Kumu men volunteered to kill the animals. In return for their help, Cham gave them the political and ritual control over Vieng Phukra. However, because they had killed the spirits of the place, the guardian spirits of the place, the Kumu could not live in the plain where the city was going to be built. And then they had, or rather they chose, to remain on its periphery. Hence the name Vieng Phukra, the fort of the barbarians, or the city of the hunters who killed the beast. The second version, of which there are many variants, tells the story of a Thai princess called sometimes Nang On Am, sometimes Nang Pom Hom, who was abandoned on a raft by her father, the ruler of a northern kingdom. The raft arrived in Vieng Phukra, where the young princess met 3 Kumu hunters. She asked them to kill the beasts that haunted the place in order to establish a city, and she promised to marry the hero who would kill those beasts. The hunter, called Sanchin, was the winner of the competition and then married the Thai princess. He came to live in the city with her. Hence the complete name of the place, Viengpukha Yatai, the city of the barbarian paternal grandfather and of the Thai paternal grandmother. So the first framework is linked rather to the Khmu oral tradition, while the second one appears more frequently in the tales of the Thai storytellers and has close relationships with the written tradition. It is therefore tempting to consider that the differences between these two frameworks coincide with historical and ethnic ones. On one side, an old and indigenous Mon Khmer framework is narrating the foundation of the town by a foreign male conqueror and legitimates the eminent right of the autochthonous Khmu uplanders over the territory. On the other side, a more recent framework from Thai origin reinterprets the first one and transforms it by adding a female character commonly found in the Thai literary traditions. It insists more on the domestication of the uplanders and on their assimilation by the lowland culture. Unsurprisingly, it is this second version that the contemporary Lao state has promoted as the official legend of Viengpukha. So things are, however, a bit more complicated and more nuanced. These two mythical frameworks have likely coexisted since a long time, and both of them draws upon historical events as well as upon cultural patterns and representations shared by the inhabitants, whatever their claimed ethnic identity. As I have previously mentioned, Viengpukha has been conquered, abandoned, and rebuilt several times in the course of its history. Enslaved population or refugees settled down here only to be later on moved again by new invaders. Simultaneously, Mon Khmer populations, either immigrant mercenaries like the Samtao or indigenous population like the Khmu, played the role of allies, guardians of the territory, and semi-autonomous observers depending on the circumstances. In this context, we can imagine that the myth of the foundation of the city by a foreign leader who later on left it in the Highlanders' protection has been literally enacted several times. It has crystallized a series of similar events in one single frame, which became a common reference that is a way to conceive history and ethnicity as much as a product of it for all the inhabitants of the place. The second mythical framework comes on top of the first one and brings a theme very well known by historians and anthropologists in this part of Southeast Asia, namely the marriage between members of two different ethnic groups as the first step of the creation of a new political entity. However, while the usual pattern is the marriage of a Thai prince with an aboriginal, often Mon Khmer woman, it is here a Thai woman who marries an indigenous Khmu man. This reversal shall be understood as the consequence, in my opinion, of a long-term coexistence and cross-contamination of several mythical and literary frames shared both by Thai and Khmu population. The princess exiled on a raft can be considered as the local version of a theme common to many different regions in Southeast Asia. A female character whose power exerts first over the aquatic world and then over the humans. And many articles about the Nagi woman, for instance. In the Thai literary tradition, we also find the character of an extraordinary woman who establishes a city and civilizes the population she encounters. For instance, here in Chiangmai, the Cham Devi legend, composed in the 15th century by a monk of Lamphun. So this legend, semi-historical chronicle, said that a foreign pregnant princess, possibly Mon, followed by a procession of craftsmen and Buddhist monks, turned away the advances of Vilanka, the animist Lawa king of Chiangmai area. She settles in the neighboring city of Lamphun and develops a Buddhist civilization there. In the oral literature also, we find similar tales of the foundation of a city by a woman. I don't have time here to develop, but there are many examples of that. And sometimes the female character is also credited for the invention of wet rice agriculture and the sharing of steamed rice. So this idea has a great resonance in the Thai world, but it is also found in the oral literature of some highland societies. Among the Khmu populations of the Namta and Vieng Pukha area, it has given shape to the myth of Yapan Peng. So this character is presented as a foreign woman with benevolent magical powers who arrives in this area by going upstream on a raft. She sets up Peng, the landscape, and she shares Pan, the territory, out the many villages. She also establishes the seasons, the agrarian calendar, and the sexual division of tasks. The myth of Yapan Peng echoes other stories of the Khmu and also the Remet lore that attribute to an old woman or a widow, or sometimes just a woman in general, the invention of housing, rearing, funeral myth, as well as meat and fish sharing. So, in sum, characters such as Nang Pom Hom, Nang On Am, Cham Devi, Yapan Peng, etc., and many others shall be considered as localized elements of the same imaginary whose combination vary in time and space. Taken together, they are part of a common cultural background that has nurtured the contemporary Thai and Mon Khmer identities and the display of their differences. Therefore, the myth that the Thai population have imported in Vieng Pukha and adapted to the local context was to some extent already available in the literary traditions of the local indigenous population. So a detailed analysis of this myth would largely exceed the time allotted to me here. I just wanted to stress the fact that both groups, Khmu and Thai, share the same ancestors or patrons and the same imaginary. Both of them attribute the creation of the Vieng, or the city, and the development of the paddy fields around it to an encounter with a foreigner, either male or female, who later becomes a tutelary spirit. In both cases, there is no mention of a violent conquest. Rather, we find here the idea of cultural models and of symbiotic relationships between a political center organized around a paddy core and its mountainous margin. So, until the early 1970s, this symbiotic relationship was enacted periodically during a collective ritual involving most of the villages settled near the historical core of Vieng Pukha city. This ritual was held each year at the beginning of the rainy season for the spirit of the Mueang, Pi Mueang in Thai language, but called locally Roi Samao. The first word, Roi, means spirit in Khmu language, while the exact meaning of the second one is unknown to me. I was unable to find a translation for this term. 12 villages were involved in the ritual, 10 of them Khmu, 1 Samtao, and 1 Lu. It consisted of a procession around the paddy core and in a buffalo sacrifice at the top of a small hill that marks the eastern limit of this paddy core. So it was near what you can see, Ban Nam Eng here. The ritual involved priests or ritual representatives from each of the 12 villages whose inhabitants clubbed together to buy a buffalo. In each village, the ritual charge of the man sent to participate to the ritual was hereditary. The ritual started with the offerings made for the Samao spirit at the top of a small mountain, so at the eastern end of the paddy core. The offerings included a female buffalo, a chicken, and an egg. Each of the ritual specialists constructed an altar under the form of a small bamboo hut at the top of the hill. He then turned around the buffalo 3 times while presenting his ritual offerings. Once the buffalo had been killed with a spear by the Khmu specialist priest, who acted, in fact, as a ritual butcher. Then the main priest, or Mo Luang, the Thai Le from Ban Lave village, soaked rice in the animal blood and put it on his own altar. Meanwhile, the ritual specialist of Ban Tiao, so Ban Tiao is the only Samtao village of this area, was reading a book of prayer and book of prayer and called for the Samao spirit to come and feed himself with the buffalo meat. The head of the buffalo killed for. Then the priest shared the meat among themselves. The Kumu priest got the head and the tail, while the Le and the Samtao priests received one rear leg each. The head of the buffalo killed for the Samao ritual was then kept in the collective house of the Kumu village, with the heads of other buffaloes killed for its village spirit. Once the sacrifice was completed, the priest of the 12 villages walked in a procession toward the western end of the Padiko and climbed on the summit of the hill just nearby the ruins of the old city. They used there a mix of coal, sawdust, and guano to make gunpowder, with which they filled a cast iron tube supposedly given by the Burmese. The sound of the explosion was heard by all the villagers, and it marked the end of the ritual. So this very brief description of the ritual underlines three of its main characteristics. First, it drew a cartography of the territory shared by the various ethnic groups settled around the historical core of Yangpukha. Second, it recalled the historical migrations that have shaped the current human setting by associating a ritual specialization to each ethnic identity. The main priest came from a recent immigrant Le village. The ritual butcher was a member of the indigenous group. And finally, the chanting priest, owner of the manuscript read during the ritual, belonged to the Samtao, a Buddhist monk Khmer-speaking group whose members claimed that they arrived in the area as mercenaries for the Burmese army and who became guardians of the Buddhist ruins while Thai populations were being resettled. Finally, the buffalo sacrifice also enacted the foundation myth and positioned each ethnic group in a regional hierarchy. In the Kumu tradition, during a buffalo sacrifice, its owner gives the rear leg to his wife-giver. Here, the Kumu priest was giving the two rear legs to his Samtao and Le counterparts, therefore symbolically recalling the original union between a Kumu man and a foreign Thai woman. So as a conclusion, I hope I still have 2-3 minutes. Yeah. As a conclusion, yes, we have seen that this population share the same myth and propitiate the same ancestors while keeping different identities. So we could ask, what are the pivotal religious and political concepts that makes possible such a trans-ethnic system? Actually, Thai and Kumu populations share nearly the same religious categories, and one of the main properties of these categories are to be deeply inclusive. Simply speaking, there is a capacity to include ancestors spearing belonging to neighboring villages and even to other ethnic groups as patrons or as their own ancestors. Many scholars have written that the main difference between Mon Khmer-speaking groups and Thai-speaking populations was the absence, among the former, of any political and religious concept above the village level. Indeed, the Kumu usually lacks a political, religious, stable concept such as the Muang for the Thai, except in some specific areas, such as Viengpukha, where the Samao spirit plays such a role. But the Kumu, however, do possess two other religious concepts linked with supra-village level, and it's my interpretation that these concepts represent pivotal categories that, under certain circumstances, can sustain multi-ethnic territorial collectives. So, the first category is what they call Roy Arak, which is, so there are many definitions. It's considered as a spirit of the forest, of the outside. It's considered as the owner of the wild animals. It's also associated sometimes with deserted settlements. And more generally, it referred to a kind of unqualified, wild, and potentially threatening exteriority. It is addressed during critical and individual rituals for which the help of a seer is required. A ritual for Roy Rak usually involved the sacrifice of an animal, chicken or pig, at the bottom of a big tree just near the village. A small figure with a human form is made with clay, and the blood of the animal is poured over it. Among the Komu villagers of Yangpukha, an Arak spirit is also created when a house does not have any male descendants. Among the Thai Yuan of Chiangmai area, we also find this category, named Pi Arak, which is associated to outside world, to maleness, and to territoriality, while there is another religious category among the Thai from Chiang Mai, which is called Pipuya, which is associated to matrilineal lineages. The second category is called under various names. Roymet is the most frequent, but we can also find Roy Ho, Ho is altar, or Roy Mok, Mok is mountain. It is sometimes conceived as a spirit of the borders. Unlike the Pimung of the Thai, it does not expressly refer to the inclusion of the village inside a wider political system. However, the altar built for this spirit includes the ancestral spirits of neighboring villages without hierarchy between them. An interesting aspect is that in some cases, this Met spirit is clearly associated in Komu villages with couples of ancestors or protectors of Thai origin. The Met altar can also merge the ancestral spirits of villages whose inhabitants, whatever their ethnicity, have resettled in a distant place. In that case, the villagers say that the Met spirits of this abandoned settlement come to eat on their altar. So, my understanding is that these inclusive categories operate as a trans-ethnic structure because they allow the manipulation of ancestrality. This process directly explains how territorial systems such as Viengpukra were created and perpetuated, and how Thai and Komu populations, while thinking of themselves as different ethnic groups, still claim the same ancestors and share the same mythical figures, although with different ideologies and discourses. And my last slide will be to thank those with whom I've worked when I was in Laos. Some of them already came to Chiang Mai and listened to this presentation. So, thank you.
So the last paper will be that of Dr. Abigail Bess. Yeah. She has been here for a while, and she wrote extensively about the Karen, and she's going to tell us about Karen cosmology.
In this communication, I propose to reconsider the ontological status of Karen animism in regard to the definition of analogism proposed by Philippe Descola, that is to say, worlds of multiplicity networked by analogies. The Karen Highlanders, living in the mountains that separate Thailand and Burma, have been for a long time encompassed in the socio-cosmic orders of the surrounding Hindu-Buddhist polities. recognized by the pre-modern state for their aptitude to protect the margins and control the spirits of the forest, in modern times they have been assimilated along with other highland groups as forest destroyers because of their shifting methods of cultivation. Confronted to important pressures of development since the past 50 years, they have been engaged, more recently, in the construction of an alternative image of forest guardians living in harmony with nature in virtue of their local systems of knowledge and animist practices. But how far this search of harmony with nature relay on animist ontological premises? In order to overcome the culturalist bias of an indigenous closeness to nature, derived from the Western naturalism, this presentation proposes to explore the Karen mode of worldling. What is the identity of the being their world is made, and how do they relate to each other? So to do so, I will use ethnographic material collected among the Zbo Karen and depart from what Philippe Descola calls a small world or a transfiguration, a concept which refers to small models of environments that condenses in a reduced space and scale the typical elements of a vernacular landscape. This small world is a winnowing rice tray, a very common object linked to their main activity, growing rice, and which is also the main door to enter their cosmology. Oh no, sorry. So the face of the tray represents the land of the living, and the back, the world of the dead, as a projection of a double-faced cosmos. This dietic form of organization, typical of analogism, is absolutely recurrent in many aspects of their social life. Kinship relations between men and women, brothers and sisters, elders and youngers, and the poetic repertory of ritual songs called Ta, where every verse are formed by pairs of complementary elements. So this right tray possesses a particular iconic value on the occasion of the burial, where it is returned and transformed into a miniature landscape on which is drawn a tree in the circle. So we come back to the tree of life we have spoken already spoken yesterday by Vitun. So this tree corresponds to the main elements of the landscape itself and to the path the dead has to follow to become, has to go through in order to become a dead spirit. So the tree, So the tree draws a vertical axis composed of three main levels and nodes. The roots represent the world of the dead. The knot in the center is the village. And the ramification distributes cultivated areas, rice fields, sweetened fields, and gardens. So I have borrowed the schema proposed by Praset Lakan Supakorn, who is going to speak this afternoon, which seems to me as the most adapted to translate the concentric conception of the territory represented by the circle. So rather than a strict opposition between domestic spaces and wilderness, village and forest, the Karen defined their space in series of circular discontinuities between the human settlement at the center and upstream forest populated by spirits and wild animals. So I would like now to depart from this, the two superposed images of the Karen vernacular landscape, to go inside its circles and nodes and explore the modes of being and relations between the different entities that are making this common world. So let's start from the outer circle upstream. Upstream levels of the land are considered as the home of tutelary spirits, seen as the first owners of the land. This category of land spirits are called Kocha and inhabit many features of the landscape, such as mountain, Kocha, springs, Kikocha, rivers and streams, Klokocha, or particular seats of the territory like ponds, trees, or tracks. Rather than the notion of body, I prefer the use of the notion of home to translate their attachment to certain places of the physical environment. The land spirits are non-human, invisible interiorities dwelling the homes of the landscape and are very sensitive to any misconduct over their abode, surrounded by taboos. These interiorities have a subjectivity characterized by a set of cultural and moral attributes. The owners, like lords, are hierarchically ordered, following the topography of the land. Every specific local frame depends on a superior regional entity, the owner of water and earth, called Tikocha Kokocha. And this lord is said to inhabit the springs situated upstreams and governs the owners of the rivers and streams which passes downstream, considered as his elder and younger children. This master acts like a sovereign and main agent in the maintenance of the territorialized sociocosmic order. He exercises his authority over the whole land, the ground, the water, wild animals and forest spirits, plants, and all life that are part of it. He also has a specific temper, which can manifest through the ambivalent potency to cool or warm the land when he is angry or hungry. Inappropriate human conducts that happen on the territory engender his punishment by all sorts of ecological or social disasters, like epidemics, droughts, bad harvests. So the relation between humans and land spirits is an asymmetrical one. Land spirits possess an ambivalent degree of potency that the human can canalize through sacrifice in exchange of their patronage, protection, and well-being. So the coolness and fertility of the land and the whole harmony between the human and their environment depends on the respect of conventions and ritual regulation with this category of land spirits, all this regulation which has now been translated through the concept of local wisdom. So they have to be fed by livestock sacrifice and libation of alcohol at crucial moments of the agricultural cycle, like you can see in this picture, or the changing of life status, like wedding, for example. They also have to be appeased when certain rules are transgressed, adultery, disputes, or rude rules among villagers. So any deviation of a member, if not repaired by sacrifice, is likely to arbitrarily revert to all or any villagers, including their livestock. All married household men has a duty to practice the sacrifice to cool the land for land spirits in its own plots, but the head of the village, called Hiko, here in the picture, is considered as the main mediator in the name of the village, as its main mediator of the village. So this man was the first man, or his patrilineal descendant, to open the forest in the village location and establish at this moment a specific contractual and continuous ritual relationship with the owner of the water and land of a basin within which is inscribed the agricultural activities of the villagers. So let's now move to the first node of the tree, the world of disembodied dead spirits and ancestor souls. The term pleu, dead spirits, refers to bodiless souls living in a totally separate realm called pleuko. The world of the dead is a complete reverse replica of the world of the living. Day is night, upstream is downstream, the east becomes the west, and the roots of trees grow in the sky. The world of the living and the world of the dead are worlds mirror. Dead spirits are human inverted persons with cultural attributes but without body. They conduct a life similar to the humans, grow wise, make rituals, and etc. The frontier between the two realms has to be maintained. Also, some human can make a dangerous travel to this realm through dreams. Despite this separation, the continuity between the generation and the two worlds is traced through the souls of the bilateral deceased grandparents of a married couple called Ré or Bra. These ancestor spirits are sometimes referred as house spirits since their main domain of action concerns family matters. The reason why we now jump to the second node, the village, which is situated at the junction between the world of the living and the world of the dead. The main ritual dedicated to ancestors is called Ohe, meaning to feed the souls of the ancestors. This ritual is mostly performed in case of the illness of a family member and consists in sacrifice of a pig or a chicken to appease their souls. It has now tended to be abandoned since the adoption of Buddhism, Christianism, and modern medicine. So in each house, traditional house, the hearth of the kitchen is considered as the main axis of the relation with the house, the elder wife of the house, ancestor spirits, and livestock reared by the woman. The ritual sacrifice is prepared and consumed in the woman's spatial domain, following the generational order of births of the family member. The parents eat first, the elder and younger children then, and their descendants following the matrilineal line. The continuity between the domestic animals consumed during this ritual are called the first pig and the first chicken, tokoti chokoti. They are acquired by a couple after they are married and must be given in sacrifice in the order of birth following the female line, so that the continuity between the lines of the human and the sacrificial animals is maintained through the mother as a nodal point to connect the generations. This continuity between the domestic units sharing food together and within a 3-generation cycle with the death of the parents of a married couple. So Karen doesn't have a strong memory of their ancestors. What matters for them is the relation and position of the immediate generational bilateral disease ascendants to chain the succession of specific parent-child ties up to a mythical guardian of the group called Zikomecha. So most of the rule concerning alliance and residence derives from who is included or excluded from sharing the food during this ritual. Immediate ancestors thus become the potent agents of the respect of these moral and social rules. Like land spirits, they can punish transgression of marriage or ritual codes or help to re-establish the integrity of one's person's health within its global environment. If we now look at the human person itself, we should take a more global approach, including including the territory as a whole and the network of relation between various flows of interiorities distributed in the different circles and nodes humans are going through: village, forest, residence, and rice fields. The human personhood is made of a combination of numerous body and spiritual components located inside and outside the body. Humans are said to possess 37 souls, or vital particles called kola. Some of them are attached to parts of the body or organs, head, heart, arms, and legs, and others are associated with animals living in the forest and are caught by placing the placenta at the navel of the tree after birth, which is a practice which now also tends to disappear. So if organs like the heart or liver are linked with personal emotion, a cold heart meaning happy, the health and the vitality of the person derives from the presence of the kola. The most important soul particle for the human is the kola koti. It resides in the fontanelle of the bulk, where is written its own destiny at birth. The kola koti is the consciousness of the person, and the loss of which, except during dreams, would result into death. All other life components of the person can escape the body. They can fly like birds during dreams or get lost for various reasons: travel, fear, vacation in nice and cool areas, all resulting in a decrease in vitality or sickness. Human souls are especially threatened by predatory spirits called tameha or tazu. This category concerns especially the spirits of the deceased from violent death, accidents, suicide, war, who wanders in the forest or ridgelines in search of vital components as food. Or it can be living persons who are said to possess bad kolas following a break in sexual interdicts. So the intervention of a medium is required in order to identify and expels the possessed person of his aggressor. Other non-humans, like animals, are said to possess kola, as well as the rice. The rice soul, which circulates across the field and territory, is intimately linked to the strengths of the person. Along with the rice soul, human souls have to be periodically strengthened and recalled through wrist-tying ritual consisting in attracting live components with sacrificial food and attach them to the body or certain places like rice fields, swidens, and granaries. Humans also have to trace the continuity with the soul of the mother of rice, called Bemopra. And in each rice plot, a special place is delimited to ritually plant the 7 seeds of the mother of rice. This crop is first harvested and brought back to the village granary, where it is stored above the rice until the next agricultural season. So this concept of kola reflects the social, permeable, and fluid dimension of life components, which not only belongs to one's person body, but also to a home, a village, and a territory. This vital life principle is a common denominator which circulates and interconnects, like a rhizome, humans and non-humans collectives of animals, plants, and spirits, more or less wild or domesticated, which are part of the same home or territorialized sociocosmic order. I would now like to invite you to follow the road of the kolakoti toward the realm of the dead in order to understand how the continuity is traced between human and non-human life processes. At the stage the disease is in the coffin, he is considered as a child who has to learn everything again. Funeral songs are meant to teach him the trajectory to reach the world of the dead and how to plant and grow rice to make his own living. It's very important that he acquires this autonomy in order not to come back in the realm of the living to search for a life component, a human life component, kola as food. So a man with a stick managed the ascent of stones or coin, since roots up to the fruit of the tree. The stones are spoken as seeds, as well as the soul of the deceased. The path of maturation of the plants also indicates, at each stop, the main steps of human life, from birth to adulthood, marked by marriage, the ultimate stage of maturation and procreation. And this process is followed by a progressive decline to old age, death, and the return to where one comes and from one can be reborn, pleko, the world of the death. So this cycling process is described in terms of rising, to, and descending, low, a movement of ascent and descent which is applied in many ritual contexts that accompany the growth of rice or the changing of life status. The idiom tobe refers to the growth of rice, topra is the idiom for marriage, and expresses the idea of climbing into adulthood and reproductive status. The collective New Year ritual that marked the transition from the old to a new agriculture cycle is called the descent of the land, kolove, and the rising of the new year, toniso. In funerals, the tree traces the parallel processes, tosesa, that's the name of this climbing of the seeds. The tree traces the parallel processes of development of human life and rice growth and operates by the reversal of the up and down direction, the transformation of the deceased from human to spirits, and the transmission of life between the two worlds. The world of the dead expresses the continuity, analogy between the life processes of the humans, death, rice, and the land itself. So in that sense, the transfiguration of the Karen landscape illustrates the main features of analysis, a world fragmented by multiple discontinuities which become intelligible in all its connections through a dense network of analogy, of correspondence or analogy. The tree draws a vertical axis that poses the hierarchical arrangement of the landscape. Springs and mountains, inhabited by the totalizing figure of the master of water and earth, condenses the most potent forces. The vital force follows the circuit of water of the highland ecosystem. It flows from the top of the spring along the rivers and streams, fertilizing the land and the concentric circles of forest and nodes of cultivated plots that surround the village. The alternative movement of rise and descent of the land draws a cycle of regeneration of the vital force that animates what Charles McDonald calls a socio-cosmic garden. In the center is the human settlement, situated at the navel of the tree, at the junction between the world of the living and the world of the dead. The human embed into a web of relation with heterogeneous elements have a pivotal role to establish at different places the assemblage and the continuities between the singularities that compose their world. These continuities are made possible through analogy, the distribution of complementary gender roles to change the lines of filiation in regard to ancestors, sacrificial animals, the soul of rice and land spirits, the reversal of the up and down directions to regenerate the double-faced cosmos, and the intertwined process of rice and human growth. In this configuration, sacrifice and the sharing of food is central to interconnect these multiplicities, canalize their potency, and establish relations of exchange between these beings. So if for the Amazonian animism, bodies are like clothing from which you can change perspective. For Karen analogism, bodies are like homes, which can be the shelter of a set of different interiorities. Perspective is not through the exchange of bodies, but through homes as nodal points to meet and amalgamate the flow of disembodied interiorities. Homes are nodes of articulation from which you can establish relation of exchange with specific assemblage of beings, human, plants, animals, and spirits, depending on the place you are and the status you have. So now, if I have to say, to conclude, to choose between analogism and hierarchical animism, I would say that these concepts don't have the same heuristic value depending on the position you are. Analogism has, on an ontological level, I consider a wider comparative value to characterize collectives made of coexisting and independent singularities embedded in a complex web of relations. Hierarchical animism, which poses the supremacy of interiorities of physicalities through the key notion of potency, is helpful in the Southeast Asian context to understand how analogical collectives like the Karen uses peripheral specialists like charismatic monks, Christian missionary, magician, medium, or even anthropologists to articulate and adapt their role to the potent surrounding polities and the challenge of the modern world. Thank you for your attention.
So the last session would be a general discussion. And before we going into that, please allow me to say some comments. I think it is crucial for us, if we want to understand the Southeast Asian cosmology, we have to understand the articulation between Hindu Buddhism and varieties of folk beliefs. And I think that the process of articulation is very complicated. On the one hand, there is tension, and on the other hand, sometimes they are complementary to each other. And the tension and complementariness are but the two sides of the same coin. In ancient times, we can see this, the expression of this articulation in the myth and folk legends. Interestingly, there are many cases in which the indigenous people and culture are represented as female, whereas Buddhism is represented as male. Sometimes they are in conflict with one another, and sometimes complementary. I think that it is necessary for us to understand in detail this complicated process. Please let me tell you another two examples of modern times of this articulation. One, I will draw example from a biography of a monk and one biography of a dog. I think go back some 20 years ago, there was a biography of a renowned meditation master who passed away for many years. And in his biography, which is written by one of his followers, there is a supernatural fight between this Theravada monk and a Kuan Yin goddess. Kuan Yin is a Mahayana Bodhisattva, but Thai people prefer to perceive her as a goddess of prosperity and luck. Now, one night, the story goes like this. One night, a goddess approached Theravada meditation master and tried to convert him to Mahayana, but he refused. So they fought against each other using supernatural power, and in the end, he lost to her. And then they made a deal. He must wear Mahayana monk's robe during the vegetarian festival dedicated to Kuan Yin in October, and he had to eat vegetarian during that festival too. And he did keep his promise. During that 7 days festival, he wore the Mahayana monk's robe over the Theravada monk's robe, but he wore it at night, and he hid himself in his residence, not letting people seeing him. So I think this story is interesting if we bear in mind that the Theravadin always regard themselves as superior to Mahayana, and not to speak about the women's status in Theravada culture, much lower than that of the male. So interesting that this story was told by the master himself to his follower, and it was recorded in a book. The second story, and this I draw from raw data of my student. He's also here in the back, Mr. Pana. He's writing a thesis about pet culture in contemporary Thai society, relationship between man and dog, humans and dog. And in this contemporary period, on the one hand, dog has become the object of heavy consumerism. On the other hand, the discourse of animal rights try to turn dogs into subject. And amid this process, recently a book appeared written by a middle-class woman telling her own story of raising a dog 30 years ago, a male dog. This dog has a very special characteristics and strange behavior. And finally, she concluded that he could remember his past lives. And then she established a way to interview him. She would ask many questions, but the answer must only be yes and no. In the case of yes, the dog would put his paw on one of her hands. So the interview begins, and she has written a kind of a rough sketch of his past life. And in his past life, he was somebody. He was a general in the Royal Thai Navy, and used to participate in the ship battle between Thailand and France in the Second World War. This is interesting. And after the dog died, the owner still claimed that she could continue communicating with him through a spirit medium who told her that now the dog was reborn as a celestial being, a Deva. And then the interview going on, and she wrote his biography in details. And later on, the descendants of this general came out to testify that a large part of what she wrote was true. And the spirit's possession took place in one of the Bangkok, a big royal temple. And the spirit medium herself, a female spirit medium, was a daughter of one of Thailand's very famous specialists of Buddhist scripture, Ajahn Bunmi Metangkul. So you see, this is a rich articulation between human, non-human, Buddhism, and animism. So I think that we should pay attention to this. So I would open the floor to you all, please.
If bitter fighting, and just the question of how is it different from cockfighting, and also we have this fish, a small fish fighting, but fish fighting is more in central Thailand, I guess. So here we have cockfighting, and also this bitter fighting. Do you notice any the difference in how they treat the animals, or anything about this relationship?
Yeah, well, the question is quite large. I would say that working on these subjects, I try to build on every specificity, ethological specificity, physiological characteristics of each animals, because actually people are very pragmatic and build on the. I just follow the players themselves. Which means that they are very aware that we all live in different worlds. I mean, they are well, they know that since they try to do something with them, and I couldn't say so much thing about cockfighting since I just noticed. Well, I spent a few days with peoples there, but it's not enough to draw a comparison. But yeah, we fish. The thing is, each time people, like I tried to show you today about beetles, people try to build on the very difference in between we humans and these animals, and so here with the beetles, they try to sustain this idea that. Maybe there's a communication, maybe there's not a communication. Sometimes it looks like, oh, the thing is obeying, and sometimes it looks like, oh, it's just escaping the device in which we try to keep him, you know. For example, the fish is a very interesting example too. This is very contrasted. A fish, the idea is that you cannot communicate with your fish during the fight, but anybody else, but players would say, "Come on, what would mean connecting with your fish? What is? Well, never know." Anyway, the thing is, with the fish, it's not a question of communication. It's only a question of perception. You know, when people go fishing, fishers will say that to be a good fisher, if you could be a good fisherman, the idea is not about seeing the fish. It's something else. It's a old conundrum of different feelings. I mean, your experience is built upon the fish ethology, what you know about him, your experience, of course, but also the experience you have of the landscape, of the every spot. Which means that when you are good, you can be a good fisher in that part of the river and a bad one on the upper part of the lower part of the river. And it's a bit the same with I would say, with this game of fish. The problem is to learn how to look at fish, but forgetting that you are looking at them. So the idea is just there to escape the fish as an agent and just to look at the movements. But this is very complicated to explain. Yeah. It's really, for me, it's really close to meditation. It's really totally different from what is happening in the. And if we take to the birds, actually the birds are the same. What I could have said very rapidly, the birds are very similar to the beetles, but the fact is that the device is split in two species. You've got no cow. Doves, white doves, and on the other side, red whiskered bulbuls, no kongwajo in Thai. And these two, I would say that these two birds make system. There's one bird which hola, red whiskered bulbul, you can interact with it, but with the doves you cannot. And the doves is just like a pure voice connecting the listener to. Well, Muslim people will say to the something which is, cannot grasp. This is Allah voice. Buddhists will say that it helps you contact with Tevada. So there are many exceptions, but on the other side, with the red whiskered bulbul, where you can communicate, the whole ambiguity is about, like with the Kwang, is the bird really reacting to your comments? There's a lot of words and signs and like this. It can be quite funny actually to witness a red bulbul competition. So each time they try to construct a kind of black box where you have inputs and outputs, but you never know what's going on. With the birds, the black box is what's going on in the communication for the red bulbuls, and with the red dove is that players cannot interact. And only the referees are in the field and listening to birds. The black box is the assessment of the referee by itself. So so building on the animal specificity, you try to put the ambiguity somewhere. Something like this.
About the naga, when you talk about this game animal, you see them in kind of analogies, yeah? And what about the naga? When you compare naga to this game animal, where do you locate the naga ritual? Is it a type of analogy to you, or hierarchical animism?
No, it's I definitely I try, but I definitely can't handle this idea of hierarchical animism. The idea is that I tried the comparison between Naga and the beetle, because the Naga helped me to understand something of the beetles I didn't understand at first when I studied only beetle fighting, which is this idea for this something that force stemming out of the ground. I didn't pay so much attention at first at all the experiences that were made by people here to try to mimic the kwamsombun, the fertility of the soil, by trying to farm, to make some kwang farming. I thought it was just like a small phenomenon. I didn't pay so much attention to it. Then when I work on the Naga, I realized that all the force here usually were coming from the ground. And I mean, taking the Naga phenomenon like a kind of epiphany that can come here and there, I began to realize that there was a kind of geography. I would say not of the difference in between what I've been saying yesterday is that I won't call them potent places, but places that potentially have something. And this is this potentiality, this possibility that have to be renewed all the time. And it's the same thing between the Kwang and the Naga. From the moment this force is out of the ground, what do you do out of it? And how do you make circulate that force in a circular manner? So here the Naga is how the Naga himself will be a conductor of this force, how he can emit this force, and it can be channeled by mediums, and it can be distributed to people, how people will give it back by their devotion and by the pilgrimage, I mean, from places where, well, I explained well the geography of the Naga, from the raw force in the lowlands to the more dharmic practice of what is the Naga in the upperlands. And for the Kwang, it was exactly the same problem about how to channel this force so everybody can take a part of it. And the syntax is the same. It's like in every part of the circuit, people have to shift all the time. You can be this and you can be that. Like I can be a Naga or not. And it needs this to the energy to go through you. It is the kind of ambiguity that makes the energy coming from one component to the other, something like this. So actually it's just the comparison between the two that seemed to me very interesting in that manner. But I don't know. You are the judge.
Just a comment on I think one of the defining contrastive features between what I call animism and analogism is the question of metamorphosis. And what Stefan was saying about fish called to my attention a short story by a Mexican novelist called The Axolotl. The axolotl is a very colorful tropical fish, and the story goes around more or less like this: is someone looking in the aquarium in Paris of tropical fish, and he's looking at an axolotl, and he's fascinated by the axolotl, and suddenly he sees himself from the inside of the aquarium. He's become an axolotl. What does this mean? It's a short story. This is a story that is common everywhere, from southern South America to Siberia and northern Mongolia. It means that you become so fascinated by the point of view of the other that you become the other. And so there are multiple stories. They're not myths, no? They are stories that people tell, no? That I was following the traces of a reindeer, for instance, and suddenly it was bizarre because the traces hunting, no, and the traces of the reindeer became a footstep, human footsteps. And then I arrived in a village, and there were people there who were very friendly, and they invited me to come to their village in tents, etc. And I spent some time, etc. And in fact, it was a village of reindeers, and so there were peculiar things. And even, I mean, there are stories like that in Signe Owens' book on the Shewong, no? You end up by well, the guy ends up by sharing the point of view of the reindeers and seeing them as humans because he's lost his bearings in a way. And then in a dream, there's a voice who says, "Flee from here. Immediately, flee from here," and he goes back to his village, and people are very surprised because they say, "You've been away for a month. We thought you were dead," etc., etc. And this is a very common story. This is a typically animist story. The fact that you share the point of view of the other, you can shift and become someone else. No, so I think and this is a very good criterion. To distinguish between animism and analogism. So I think there are acid tests like that. Another one, which is to me quite striking, is the ability to define the world so I was thinking of what Abigail was telling us, to define the world in terms of categories, no, the wet and the dry, the hot and the cold, male and female, etc., etc., which is completely obsessive in analogous systems, and which has absolutely no importance in animist system. There are some. I mean, you can say in some places that a plant is cold and another one is hot, but it's not an overarching system as it is in analogism. So I think there are acid tests like that allows us to see whether it's tipping towards one regime or another. No, things that are deemed possible and things that are deemed impossible. No,
to some extent related to with Discorad's comments, but toward the end of presentation, and Abigail touched upon the analogism, but and also the hierarchical animism. Is it a kind of analogism, or the I wonder whether the hierarchical animism is derived from the modified from animism, or the different relation to within. That's the point.
In fact, if I understood, I don't think that it was first animism transformed in analogism. I don't know about the Karen before, what they were in the origins, hunters or anything, and that they have changed so much that they become analogists. But if I really look at the way they make relation with the being of their worlds, the being their world is made, I see more features of analogism, and I don't think they are the consequences of the contact of the Buddhist polities, surrounding polities. So, well, when I was also, I always called Karen, I always considered that Karen were animists. So I reread my material and considered the proposition of Philippe Descola of analogism. And if I regard it, I really think that analogism is more appropriated to qualify their ontology.
I have a question following that. Yesterday we talked about that there were two papers on sacrificial right. Now, sacrifice also is a part of animism and is also a part of analogism. So my question is, is there any difference in the significance of sacrifice in animism and analogism? Is there any difference about the meaning of sacrifice? Yes.
Initially, I saw sacrifice as a connecting device. That is, and a very efficient one between the sacrificant and whoever the sacrifice was offered to. One of the reasons why I saw that as a very efficient connecting tool, which is very important, again, in analogous systems, given the multiplicity of elements and the fact that most of them are singularities, the important thing is to connect. And so it can be done through hierarchy, it can be done through sacrifice, it can be done through all-embracing classifications like the hot and the cold, the wet and the dry, etc., etc. But obviously, there's a grading, as I said yesterday, where sacrifice enters, and probably one would have to retake the whole continuum from, again, northern Siberia to Southeast Asia, where you have combinations, complex combinations between, because a sacrifice is always domestic animals, no? It's domestic animals because they share some characteristics of humans. So there's a French Sanskrit scholar, Charles Malamud, who says that in India, in fact, the prototype of what is being sacrificed is the human. It's always the human, and I would share the idea that everywhere, it's so everything that is being sacrificed are substitutes of humans. No, and of course, the closer they live to humans, and it is the case of domestic animals, the better they are as substitutes. So when you, as I said yesterday, when you take the lives of animals directly, of wild animals, they exact retribution on humans by being, I mean, when you consume wild animals, you consume subjectivities. The wild animals are persons. So when you eat a person, you eat a subjectivity. And when you eat a subjectivity, and it's in the ethnography of Kai Odom in Amazonia, for instance, it's very interesting, among the Makuna, there are names among the Makuna for the material aspect of these subjectivities which harm humans when they eat them. So one of the obsessions in animal system is to decontaminate the meat. There's a very nice saying, which I think I quoted in Beyond Nature and Culture, by Ivalwar Juk, who was the informant of Rasmussen, and it's an Inuit shaman, who said, the greatest peril of life is that the food of humans is entirely made of souls. I think it puts it very neatly, no? So if you eat a soul, it's a dangerous business. And that's not a problem when you eat a chicken or when you eat a buffalo. So it's much easier then to give back to the spirits or to whoever you have a problem with the meat of domestic animals. So there would be a vast area of transformation between domestic animals, tamed animals, wild animals, and Siberia is interesting in that respect because people there hunt reindeers, tame reindeers, have domesticated reindeers. Tame in the sense that they are, like in some places in Southeast Asia, they are in the forest for 10 months of the year, and then they are rounded up at certain periods of the year, etc., etc. So I think sacrifice has to be set against this panorama of the relationship with animals. When I say animal, it's animal spirits, it's all other forms of non-humanity. And by contrast, you have places. I'm thinking of the Nifks on the Amur Basin, no, and also in Hokkaido and the Sakhalin, where bears were captured and were ritually killed. But this was not a sacrifice. This was the bear was also partly humanized, but it wasn't offered to anyone. It wasn't a gift to anyone. So I think that there's a large comparative work to be done on all these variations in the life-taking of non-humans and life-giving to non-humans, to put it in a more complex formulation than the one perhaps I gave when I said, well, there's a clear distinction between sacrifice and in analogism and non-sacrifice. But what is obvious is there's no sacrifice in animism in the Americas and up to Siberia. There's no sacrifice in totemism either, no?
Okay, my question is to Professor Descola. If you forgive me, I'm going to ask another kind of political question. At the end of your talk, I was struck by your discussion of proposing an animist cosmopolitics. So my question is about the status of the political subject within that cosmopolitics. I liked how you kind of emphasized the need of thinking through the political subject through relationality, as opposed to some sort of like prior essence or origin, right? That we're kind of become predisposed with in terms of modern discourse about political subjectivization. And I liked how you bring in Rancière, something I'm trying to kind of think through, right? How Rancière conceives the political subject and how we can perhaps do that in relation to non-human collectivities, right? I think it's a really fascinating question, and that relates to kind of an anti-foundationalist politics that I think animism can help us think through, at least in political theory. So part of that, as you know, with Rancière, right, this putting together of worlds, right, is about staging a dispute. It's an aesthetic question about how we cut up, right, the sensible world of our experience, right, how we categorize or distinguish our social milieu. But for him, it's also about staging a dispute, right, or a wrong. And that seems to me poses again that question of normativity, of value, perhaps even teleology, that I find hard to reconcile with an animist politics, and I'd like to get your thoughts on that. In particular, right, Rancière makes that distinction between that there's a gap, right, in logos between voice, right, and then how we can account for that through language and what have you, and that seems to be quite irreconcilable, right, with an an animist notion of non-human political agency in particular. So to cut to the chase, I would like to kind of hear your thoughts on how we can think the status of this kind of biosemiosis, right, or kind of symbolic thought within an approach that's inspired by Rancière, that's trying also to kind of conceive of non-human collectivities on a more kind of equal footing with kind of a political agenda per se. Sorry, it's a lot there.
Small question. I'm working on that right now. So it's what I found interesting in Rancière was precisely the fact that he came with this idea of the relations between political relations as relations between the world out of the analysis of our post-industrial world, and not at all by taking any examples from pre-modern people. And so I found a resonance between what he was trying to do as a politician. Well, he's not only he's a philosopher in general, but a philosopher in that at that time dealing with politics. No. What I find interesting, in fact, are also although it may not appear to you as such, I'm a starch empiricist. So in India, it has in different places. No, the Wanganui River. This is interesting because, in fact, when you look at the way that the Parliament has argued for this granting civil personality to the river, it's in fact because it's a medium of life. It's a milieu, in fact. Properly, it's a milieu which supports some kinds of relations that are to be maintained. And what I found quite extraordinary is that, in fact, in the intellectual process of the Parliament, which is based on common law, which is based on the also probably the attempt to go beyond the traditional division in juridical division between persons and things, which has been so constant in our way of thinking in the West. They come very close to the definition which I gave of this community in the Amazon, Sarayaku, which claims that in fact their territory should be recognized not mainly because it's a support for certain kinds of relations. And in that sense, it's interesting because I was talking yesterday, I think, of the fact that we should be aware of how anthropocentric is the way we think about all these things. And in that respect, it's less anthropocentric. You can't escape anthropocentrism, of course, but it's less anthropocentric in the sense that it's not based on possessive individualism, on the idea that humans appropriate the world because they have, etc., which has been especially in political philosophy ever since Locke and Hobbes and etc. No, but what Macpherson called possessive individualism and all this, which has been constant in the way we see the relationship of humans to what natural resources, non-humans, whatever. And so I see a way out progressively of this obsessive anthropocentric dominion over the world. And in that respect, I'm full of optimism in the sense that there are seeds of everywhere, in many parts at least, both at the center of the post-industrial world, like in New Zealand, and in Amazonia and in other places, of a change of paradigm. It will take a long time, no doubt. But it also in political activism. In France, we have a movement called ZAD, Zone à Défendre. And it's been very active for the past 5 or 10 years. And these are people, when there's a major project, a Promethean project, no? Building a new airport, etc., which in fact affects the lives of the people where this new infrastructure is going to be built, and affects also the ecology of the place, no? People gather, not only the local, who do not want this infrastructure, let's say an airport, because it's one of the most famous is an airport in the west of France, a new airport, and they gather from all over the place, and they gather not because they want, well, they want to protect the place, of course, but they say they all form part of a milieu, of a medium of life that has to be defended because of a very specific relations that are given in this place between humans and between humans and non-humans. So, and this is completely independent. I mean, they've never read, I mean, some of them now are reading Descola, Latour, whatever, or Viveros de Castro, etc. But it's very recent. I mean, the initiative of the movement is completely distinct from what we've written, no? But I see that also as a symptom of this move, no? And the idea of, in fact, that they constitute a collective which is a collective, not a given collective, but a collective which is in the process of collection by association around a place where certain kinds of relations with non-humans are dominant. Mm.
Thank you very much. And I have a question in a way, how this concept can accommodate gender. Stefan's paper, on the beetle, it's a local game or sport, and only young boys would learn how to raise, how to find, and how to take care of it. And now it has become, what you call it, gambling type, and more so in taking care of it by using spirits to help. For an example, a learned man or a monk would have to recite the sacred language and blow on water to sacrifice it, and then they would use the water to spray when the beetles, before it entered the ring, and that kind of thing. So, and that all the equipment using has to be blessed, and so on and so forth. But then again, it's dealing with only male, young age up, this one. And then you also fish, bagat, fighting fish, and also that kind of treatment with roots that, has to be sanctified and by learned man and monk. And I think more so like, that's male, and then water buffalo race in the south, or ox in the south. I think it's more, mystery or more spirit assistant into betting and into strengthening the strength and the natural strength and so on. So I think that kind of thing. How can we work on that with this concept? And for female, I'm more familiar with silkworm raising by female only in the northeastern part of Thailand, and the auspicious day, to start a new batch, and the lady has to clean herself physically, and then when she has menstruation, it's someone else has to take care of the daughters. And while you feeding, the silkworm, and you have to almost like to talk, to say all good things no bad things has to be said while doing that. So that kind of, but it's strictly that's female, and that kind of thing. So I kind of wonder how sports or games dealing with animals and with insects, how we can build that with this this concept that we're dealing with for 2 days. Thank you.
You talked about the Buddha not ordaining the Naga because he was a sneak. They didn't ordain women either. The Buddha did not ordain women either. And that was the first thing I thought of when you said that. I was like, oh, that's right. Yes, there is, not just animals can't be ordained, but only men. Now, there was some modification of that later on, but it was a point of contention. So to add it to that gendered issue, what do you think? That's a really good question.
Okay, yes, very quickly. Considering the ordination of women, well, it depends where in the Buddhism, of course. It's really difficult to answer this question, since I guess in the history of this country, some women have been ordained, but yeah, maybe a long time ago. There have been a pulsation between the possibility for women to, but I'm not a specialist of this, but considering Ajahn Surya remark about, yeah, of course, all these techniques of taking care of animals are based on traditional practice of nurturing life. Actually, the parallel you draw in between the silkworms and animals is very interesting, if we project the gender issue on this. Since we have a colleague actually who's working on silkworms. Her name is Annabelle Vallard, who has been doing a very great job about just what you said. And one of the main issue of her work, is to identify where come from this soft power of the silkworm. And she shows, I mean, in a kind of mirror, I would say, if I take your rational, in a kind of mirror, how to say, miroir inversé, yeah, like the cross, yeah. That actually the silkworm imposed to human beings, if I take now my rational, the silkworm impose its softness, its fragility, and one can understand why. I mean, for cultural reason or not cultural reason, why maybe women are more disposed than men to take care of silkworms. Well, in kind of resonance in between the two, and why when it comes to I would say these schools of politics, male are more engaged in this kind of sports and gambling issues around animal. Since these animals, how to say, fighting is of course some kind of, I would say, metaphorical kind of metaphor for war, for politics, for whatever, of course. And when we see the division here in Thailand, I will not speak of the other part. Sure, the male are there to manage the relation between the household and the exterior and the outside and the forest and everything, when the woman is supposed to take care of the domestic area, roughly. So yeah, there's a lot of different correspondence on this, but yeah, I think it's interesting. Yet I cannot speak about silkworms that well. We should have invited Annabelle.
The right that you get, that many countries give to all this inanimate object. I know that you work on the anthropology of nature in Latin America. But I'm thinking of one thing when this question was raised. What about the AI? The AI, the artificial intelligence and the robot. I would like you to reflect on this question. Yeah, maybe I'm sorry, but I just want to hear what is your opinion.
We are now in situations where the most common non-humans are organic non-humans, but artifactual non-humans. Especially in post-industrial societies, that robots, computers, artificial intelligence, etc. And so the question precisely is, how are we going to accommodate these non-humans in our collectives? For the time being, there's no. It's the same problem as with animals or rivers or whatever. No, they are considered as things, and I think that the reflection. We are at the beginning of a major shift, I think, and the reflection has to address not only rivers, lakes, chimpanzees, or whatever. But also robots, artificial intelligence, etc. Because the whole inheritance we have of the juridical and political system precisely excludes non-humans, and this has been accentuated in the 18th century by the constitution of the modern political constitution, let's say, no, which it created itself by excluding non-humans from the city. They were accommodated in one way or another in the medieval city, in the West, in antiquity, etc. Then they were excluded in the 18th century. They were excluded in favor of new humans. So it had very positive results, which is human rights, etc., etc. But at the same time, we are faced now with a situation where we have to accommodate all these non-humans and not anymore as things that can be appropriated, on which there are rights of usage, on which there are copyrights and things like that, but in a more complex way. So I think they are both. Artificial intelligence is part of the project we should engage with, of giving a more accommodating common house to non-humans.
Can I just follow up on that point? There's been a lot of interesting work shifting towards looking at data, big data, particularly algorithms, right? And trying to start to kind of think about creating a regulative framework for algorithms, so like major companies, Amazon, Google, right? The algorithms, in fact, are largely ungoverned at present. So there's kind of a global kind of concerted effort towards looking at how we can kind of regulate big data and regulate the algorithms that govern a lot of our decisions, through the various kind of technologies such as the phone and what have you that we use. I think it's quite an interesting kind of rejoinder to the larger discussions about non-human agency.
Some state in America, it is said that there's a law allowing you to marry a robot. So thank you, everybody. See you again at 2 o'clock.